Welcome to the InfoSec Insider podcast, brought to you by URM, the UK's leading information and cybersecurity specialists.
Hi, my name's Annie and I'm here today with Neil Jones, who's a senior consultant with us at URM. Welcome to another episode of InfoSec Insider. So today Neil and I are going to be talking about clause 6.3 of ISO 27001. So to start off, Neil, could you give us a high level overview of what clause 6.3 is and why planned ISMS change management is so important for organisations today?
Sure. Good morning. So clause 6.3, planning of changes, states when the organisation determines the need for changes to the ISMS, the changes shall be carried out in a planned manner. It is well established that to avoid service disruption, organisations need to approach change to their systems and infrastructure in a controlled manner. The ISMS is no exception. In this case, failure to control change risks the inability to manage security threats or even the introduction of new security threats.
Amazing. Thank you, Neil. So what do organisations most often get wrong when planning ISMS changes under clause 6.3?
Well, possibly the biggest mistake is failing to take ISMS change management seriously by not addressing it in policy or not recognising how ISMS change differs from technical change, such as how changes need to be assessed and by whom. For example, who needs to be involved in the assessment of a change? While technical changes may need assessment by the IT, operations and directly impacted business community only, a change to the ISMS requires wider consideration and approval by ISMS leadership, relevant executive leadership, and in the most mature management systems, socialisation with other business management. A change advisory board will often be in place for technical changes, but the organisation should consider whether the same CAB needs to review ISMS changes or whether a separate ISMS CAB is needed. However, an ISMS CAB will likely have the same membership as a security oversight board, so the organisation needs to consider if an ISMS CAB is even required.
So you've recommended 7 practical actions for effectively implementing clause 6.3, and these are to create a change management policy, identify information security risks associated with the proposed changes, conduct regular management reviews, consider the need for change testing, back-out plans, and for a change advisory board, as you've already mentioned. And finally, to have a change request form or ticketing system. Which of these 7 recommended actions do you find organisations overlook the most and why?
Well, firstly, I would say identification of information security risks associated with the proposed ISMS changes, but coupled with failure to document the ISMS changes fully. Organisations can address both with ISMS change request forms, which are crafted to prompt the appropriate analysis of ISMS changes, such as considering the information security risks. However, these forms are rarely in place. Another common omission is testing of changes. The testing of changes is an integral part of any technical change management process, but it can be difficult to imagine how to test the more esoteric changes involved in ISMS change management. How do you test the implementation of a new policy? If you make a material change to the risk assessment process, how do you back out the change if it causes issues? How do you even identify those issues? Nevertheless, some form of testing should be undertaken and significant thought may need to be invested in how to achieve this, which is maybe why testing of ISMS changes is rarely undertaken.
So clause 6.3 allows for flexibility. How should organisations decide how much structure their change process needs?
I don't think there is much to decide about how much structure is required. As we've discussed earlier, a structured process is necessary, if for no other reason than to evidence the assessment of proposed changes. The conversation really needs to be about whether the existing technical change management process that is in place for Control A32 is suitable for ISMS changes, or whether a separate process needs to be developed. This will vary from organisation to organisation. We have already picked out a couple of areas that need to be included, i.e. assessment of information security risks and testing of changes. These steps are needed both in technical and ISMS change management, but the approach taken will vary. The starting point for designing your ISMS change management process will be looking at your technical change management process and asking, can I use this for ISMS changes, albeit with some tweaking, or is it not fit for purpose? To help, Look at your own organisation's governance structure to see whether the process would fit in with it, and consider how the process would need to change to fit it.
Amazing. Thank you, Neil. So if any of our readers want to learn a bit more about this topic, Neil's written a fantastic blog on our website, which is urmconsulting.com. And that blog's called ISO 27001, Clause 6.3, The Importance of Planned ISMS Change Management. So in that blog, Neil goes into sort of breaking down those 7 practical actions, giving examples, and just sort of breaking down the entire clause and its requirements sort of from every possible angle. So do go and check that out. Thank you very much for listening today, and we will see you next time. If you've enjoyed this podcast, we would really appreciate it if you could spare a moment to leave a rating or review at ratethispodcast.com/InfoSec Insider. To listen to more episodes, you can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and Podbean.
Thank you for listening to URM's InfoSec Insider podcast. For more information, visit our website at urmconsulting.com.